Hello, I'm going to talk today about the famous dream vision of Jacob Yaakov Avinu uh, with the sullam of arza, which generally taken to be the ladder that's placed on the ground but reaches up to heaven. It's found at the beginning of Parashat Vayetze, and I'm stimulated once again by the Jewish Study Bible, which I've recently acquired and which I enjoy reading. Being one of the believers, I don't buy into the documentary hypothesis, but I'm not averse to hearing what they have to say and examining their claims and especially their evidence. And what struck me in the notes to this parsha was something that rubbed me the wrong way, a sort of lack of humility. What do I mean by that? People will say that the documentary hypothesis, the critical theory, critical commentary of the Bible is science. And science, of course, is on a higher plane than belief or opinion and so on. Well, whether we want to grade these planes as high or low is one question. But another question is just what is science? And here, I can speak with some professional competence. I'm not a licensed or diploma in biblical commentary. I do have a doctorate in history of science, and one of the things we try and look at and press home to our readers is what just is the difference between science and other fields of knowledge that do not qualify as science. And in my view, and here I'm following the teacher of my teacher, Karl Popper, it's the humility of science in the sense that in science and only in science does one say from the outset that my thesis, my claim, is open to refutation. In religion or politics, you can argue until the cows come home. Very often, or more often than not, your opponent will not budge or change their mind at all because you can always, find some way. You can always word your positions so that you have an escape route. But in science, when you say that this is the evidence, this is the experiment, this is the reasoning that leads me to draw the following conclusions, you're opening yourself up to refutation. If there's some flaw in the evidence, or some flaw in your reading of the evidence, or some flaw in your logic in deducing conclusions from the evidence, it can be exposed, and we're supposed to be grateful for that, because this will thus move us along forward, if there is such thing as moving forward. So, with regard to Jacob's ladder, the Jewish Study Bible says that what Jacob saw in his dream was a stairway. It's as italicized as a way of emphasizing it's a stairway, and then in parentheses, not a ladder. And that rubs you the wrong way. If you want to, claim that it wasn't a ladder or may not have been a ladder, that's a very legitimate claim, as I'll be saying shortly. But with such, firmness, it's definitely a stairway, and it's not a ladder, is something that rubs me the wrong way and stimulated me to make this video where I'll have some thoughts on what the dream may have had and what its significations are, though I have no firm conclusions and nothing, no fully prepared meal to put on the table. To begin with, let me just say that there are two things that must be taken into account here, or at least two, maybe three. One is the philology. What exactly does the Hebrew word sullam, the word that's generally taken to be ladder, what does it mean? Then what is the context? What is the place of this device, this piece of furniture or whatever called the sullam, ladder, staircase, ramp in the dream, which is just forces us to take some sort of stance as to what the dream is all about. And then third, there's a word of caution. interpreting the Bible, interpreting the Torah is always a matter of of speculation, of trying to understand something that has maybe meanings that are deeper than beyond we can get. But and almost every verse may have some sort of subtext that's very different from the plain sense. But here, since the text is describing a dream, and dreams are by their very nature things that don't make sense in reality, don't really take place in the outer world that we experience in our waking hours. When you have a dream embedded in the text of the Bible, so you're really going out on a limb trying to say what it means. With this in mind, I'll move on to the first topic, which is the etymology and the possible meanings of the word sullam. So let's begin with the philology, the etymology, the possible meanings of the Hebrew sulam. And here we run right away into a real problem, because the Hebrew word sulam is what we call in professional lingo a hapax, meaning that this is the only place that this word appears in the entire Tanakh. Usually when you have a word that's difficult to understand, well, if you have 2 or 3 verses where it appears, you can sort of triangulate and taking each verse in its own context, get a hold on what the word means. But there's no other verse to turn to. And so even though people have suggested, the root derivation and Hebrew words such as mesilah or solalah that may be connected somehow to the meaning of sulam, there's no really way to go to a dictionary and solve just what the word means. So people have thought of, well, what could it be if it's something that's connecting heaven and earth? What connects things that are higher with things that are lower? Of course, we're not talking about elevators at the time or rockets or balloons. So the standard interpretation was that it meant a ladder, because that's what it means for sure in Mishnaic Hebrew, where they talk about ladders that you use to climb up to a dovecot, people who are raising pigeons. But the other interpreters, including the Oxford Study Bible, suggest either a ramp or a staircase. Those also go up and down. They go up and down within structures. And the reason why the ramp or staircase appeals to such interpreters of the Bible, to the point of deciding that that's what it means and not a ladder, is that these are found in palaces, but in particular in temples in ancient Mesopotamia, the famous ziggurats, these huge temples that had these ramps going up, which were designed to reflect or embody the Mesopotamian idea of a God standing at the top in the heavens, and this structure connecting the people on earth and the priests going up and down with the God in the heavens. So it's this context which is read into the story, because in Jacob's dream there is no building, there is no structure, there is no temple. There's simply a ladder, or a sulam, going from heaven to earth, to suggest that he had in mind the ziggurat, one of these Babylonian temples, and so the sulam would mean either a staircase or a ramp, depending on what these temples had. Well, okay, so that's the possible context, and we'll save that for a little later. But the idea that this is a ramp is actually not a bad idea. But first of all, and in fact, it's already the Midrash once again has beaten the modern critical commentators to the punch by hundreds or even more years, because in one of the Midrashim, making though a clear a move which is midrashic, because they're not saying that this is the psychology behind the image that was produced in Jacob's mind when he dreamt. They're saying this is our interpretation of the symbolism of this dream. The Midrash also, one of the Midrashim that is cited in the Yemeni compilation called Midrash Gadol, says that it's the Sullam is the Kevesh HaMizbeach, the ramp that went up to the altar in the temple. But that's the context, and that's as a possible context, whether you take it as a historical, idea that this is the literary motif or theme that was behind the writers, the priestly writers, the J writers, the E writers, who put this dream into Yaakov's sleep, or however you want to look at it. But there is a problem there in that how would Jacob, given his accepted chronology, have ever seen a ziggurat? There were none in the land of Israel. Jacob was born in the land of Israel, and up until this time, when he has to run for his life to a place in northern Syria, he's never left the land of Israel, and his father, Yitzchak, also never left the land of Israel. Now, his grandfather, Avraham, may well have seen one of these ziggurats, these Babylonian temples, because it turns out that the huge temple for Marduk, which was built by Hammurabi, and which is sort of the epitome, the paragon of the Babylonian place of worship, was written more or less at the time, was built more or less at the time that Abraham lived. And some people have suggested, in fact, that the building of this huge temple for Marduk was the impetus, if one can speak of such. It's a little, I think, bold and impetuous, but for the prophecy telling Abraham to leave Mesopotamia. In other words, when things were there, got to the point where not only was idol worship rampant, but the king had built this magnificent temple. That's the time to get out. So there's no reason to suppose, assuming that we're talking about someone trying to make this a character historical, that Yaakov would have ever seen a ziggurat and could have had that in mind. So that's so even though the idea of it being a ramp as part of some sort of temple, which priests go up and down, is not that extraordinary. As I said, it's in the Midrash. The appeal to the ziggurat seems to me to be a little bit risky and something that should be reconsidered. Now, I would like to reconsider the possibility that Sullam actually does mean ladder, and to do that, I have to return to the question of context. Context meaning what is the purpose of this dream, and what could have been, and that would have sort of lie behind the imagery that was conjured up in Yaakov's mind while he slept and received this divine influx. The divine influx does not necessarily contain images, but the receiver's mind transmutes takes the sort of highly abstract message from heaven and makes it into a story with images drawn from the dreamer's own imagination. I'm, of course, using Rambam, Maimonides' theory of prophecy. But anyway, so it's clearly something that's connected. The dreamer has some idea of some connection between heaven and earth, and it's leading up to God, who is at the high end of this Sulam, revealing himself to Jacob and giving a prophecy. But now the question is but let me broaden the context, because there is another context here which was again mentioned by ancient commentators and by modern commentators, and that's the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel, the story from the first Parsha, also speaks of a high structure connecting heaven and earth. And of course, the story is a completely different one. Jacob's one is a forefather, a saintly person who is receiving his very first prophecy and message from God and encouragement from God. Whereas the Tower of Babel is a story of humans rebelling and wanting to sort of build some structure that would allow them to assault heaven, to send their troops up there, up and over the wall and into heaven and take over. Uh, but still, since structurally the two stories are very similar with these either a sullam or a migdal connecting heaven and earth. Some have said that the structure that Yaakov sees, this sulam, this ladder or ramp, whatever, connecting heaven and earth, comes as a correction or as an atonement, as what they would call in Kabbalah, tikkun, for the sin of the Tower of Babel. One other connection with the Tower of Babel, and that's leading me to my main point here, is that when Jacob wakes up, his first spontaneous words are man norah hamakom hazeh. Norah in Hebrew literally means how awe-inspiring, how frightening this place is. And now you want to say, well, why is it so frightening? He's had a wonderful dream with a vision from God. How can it be so frightening? Well, if this structure has some reminiscences, some allusions to the Tower of Babel and these wicked people trying to assault heaven, then we can see why he could have been frightened by the dream and not just inspired. And this brings me back to the idea of Sulam and ladder, because the one area where we have hard archaeological evidence for ladders that we know today, ladders with rungs, ladders that you climb up to clean the roof from leaves, or ladders to climb up to get something from a high shelf in the kitchen, or ladders you use to paint. Ladders, not ramps, not staircases, but ladders, comes from the war equipment, particularly of the Assyrians. Because in ancient times, when people would defend themselves by building walls around their cities, the attacking army would use ladders in which the soldiers would simply scale the ladder and climb over the wall and enter the city. And we have plenty of illustrations of these. So if there is any at all, any resonance, any illusion, any any afterglow or whatever of the Tower of Babel lying behind this dream. And of course, in a dream, these things could all be mixed up together. It's a prophetic dream of inspiration, but it also has some allusions, some hints to an earlier story, which is in a different direction. It's a dream. Dreams have these things going on that don't make sense in our ordinary waking lives. It's possible that he saw a ladder going to heaven, but here it's not an assault ladder by these wicked people of Babel who are trying to attack heaven and invade and take over, but it's a ladder connecting heaven, bringing up and down messages, particularly here giving a message from God to Jacob, telling him not to worry and continue with his mission. So I think here in sum that one, we cannot rule out that Sulam does mean ladder even in the Bible. I'm not saying categorically that it does. It's wrong and unscientific to make such bold and statements. But I'm saying that we can't rule it out, and we shouldn't take the high ground and look down among all these people who say it's a ladder. No, it's not a ladder. If you knew what you were talking about, it couldn't be a ladder. It had to be a staircase from a ziggurat. No, it's a possibility, but to me it seems more remote actually than it being an actual ladder and something that was borrowed from an earlier story and transmuted from a tool or a device or structure that was used for wicked purposes. The people who built the Tower of Babel trying to assault heaven and transmute it into high, deep spiritual imagery to illustrate the communication between heaven and earth. So I hope that you found some interest in this, and if you have any comments, please don't hesitate to write. Thank you very much for your attention, and Shabbat Shalom.